Space, the final frontier. This is the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. Its mission to explore the solar system, to seek out new observations and data, to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. And now the host of the Observer's Notebook, Tim Robertson.
Hello and welcome to episode 110 of the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. I am Tim Robertson, the host of the podcast, and also the coordinator of the training program within the ALPO. Thank you for downloading and listening. The ALPO collects and analyzes observations of various solar system bodies and associated phenomena, and publishes detailed reports concerning these bodies in its quarterly publication, the Journal of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. This podcast depends upon donations from you, our listeners, to keep it alive. If you enjoy what you hear on the podcast, you can donate to it via Patreon by giving as little as $1 a month. If you feel even more generous, for $5, you receive early access to the podcast before it goes public. For a monthly donation of $10, you receive a copy of the Novice Observer's Handbook. And for $35 a month, you receive producer credits on the podcast. Observer's Notebook. And I'd like to take this moment to thank all of our Patreons who help support the podcast. Jerry White, Jason Inman, Matt Will, Steve Siedentop, Matthew Benton, Ken Poshedly, Stephen Bennett, Michael Moyer, Shawn Dilles, Frank Schenck, Damian Allis, and Charles White. Thank you very much for your support of the podcast. We couldn't have it without you. If you'd like to join the ALPO, you can for as little as $18 a year. For more information, you can find us at www.alpo-astronomy.org. And you can find the ALPO on Facebook as well. Just search for ALPO Astronomy. And yes, this here podcast has a Facebook page as well. Just search for the Observer's Notebook. And if you enjoy what you hear on the podcast, please subscribe. That way you'll never miss an episode. And now, episode 110 of the Observer's Notebook. Enjoy. All right, I'd like to welcome everybody back to this edition of the Observer's Notebook podcast. And today we have a special guest, Bill Paolini. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Yeah. Now, this subject we're going to talk about has been on my bucket list since I started the podcast in 2017. And it was like in my top 5 of topics. And I just haven't found anyone to have on that could speak as an expert on this topic.
So you've taken all this time to get to the most important part of all the equipment. Okay.
It really is. It really is. And for lunar and planetary observing, I'm talking about the use of color filters. Mm-hmm. And Bill recently wrote an article that got my attention in cloudy nights. And before we get into that, though, why don't you just give everybody a little bit of background about yourself, Bill?
Well, as far as my astronomy background, I guess I got interested in astronomy somewhere around the first grade, and me and my best friend back then would do reports in school on UFOs and things like that, and then my neighbor, we would just lay down in the yard and look at the sky and wondering what some of those moving things were every once in a while. Of course, they were satellites, but to us, they were spaceships in orbit. So that was always fun. And then when I was 10 is when I got my first telescope, and I've had telescopes ever since. And
what was that first telescope?
Oh, it was one of those department store refractors.
A little 60 millimeter?
Yeah. Yep. They're long things, very difficult to find anything with.
Right.
And then quickly went from that to like a 4 1/4 inch Newtonian. And I lived in New Jersey, so we'd always be going to Edmonds Scientific.
Oh, my.
And boy, that place would definitely spur all your interest in science and stuff, because the showroom was just a wonderland of everything astronomy and everything science. And then their surplus room had all the spare part optics and different things. And it was just a magical place.
Yeah, I remember devouring the Edmund Scientific Catalog when I was younger, just wanting everything in it.
Yeah, well, the showroom made the catalog look
Yeah, I remember the lasers. That's what I remember most.
Yeah. And they had that big periscope in the middle of the room, which worked.
Wow.
View out the top of the building with it. So,
very cool.
All kind of crazy stuff. Great store. So sad that they closed their showroom.
Yeah. So what's your current observing equipment?
Primarily, I use a 4-inch Takahashi TSA 102.
Nice.
And I use a 81 millimeter Vixen 81S APO.
Okay.
Which gets a fair amount of use because it's just so non-convenient. You never have to wait for cool down. Small, you can just pick it up and throw it outside really quickly.
Right.
And it really does some amazing views for 81 millimeter. It often really surprises me. And then once in a while I'll take out the APM 152 ED doublet for when I want to go deeper on things. But pretty much I'm satisfied with the 4-inch aperture for most everything except galaxies. Galaxies I need the 6-inch to get some views better with those.
Okay, and you're retired?
Yes, retired like 3 years ago.
Oh, congratulations.
From the federal government.
Ah, okay. Nice. And so this topic, there's a lot of basic guides out there for using color filters, but for lunar and planetary observing. But you really did a lot of digging into this, a lot of research. Can you talk about some of the experiments and analysis you used with your variety of setups?
Well, what I was very concerned with when I did the views was keeping track of the exit pupils I was using. So when you put an eyepiece and put that with your objective, you use a formula for the two of those to calculate what the resulting exit pupil is, which is basically how bright the view is going to be. And it kind of like, once you understand exit pupils, it kind of levels everything out, and you don't have to worry about apertures because every aperture can usually work with a good range of exit pupils.
Can you now for some of our listeners might not know what an exit pupil is, can you just give it a brief definition?
Yeah, an exit pupil is actually when you put the eyepiece in the telescope, and of course it forms an image, and the image it forms in space above the eye lens has a diameter, and it's a little circle of a certain diameter, so it can be anything from 7 millimeters to 6.543 down to a fraction of a millimeter in size. And generally, well, not generally, but the larger the exit pupil, the lower the magnification, hence brighter the image, and it just follows the normal rules of light, where it's basically the area of that little circle. So if you double the circle size, then you get 4 times the brightness, but your magnification goes down. So it's a very handy thing to keep track of when you observe what the exit pupils are that you're using. Because you'll soon discover that regardless of the scope you use, for one type of object, you tend to go with a certain set of exit pupils, and then another one, you go larger ones, and such like that. So, my filter analysis was basically running around planetary views. So I was keeping the exit pupil at what are normal exit pupils for most APOs for planetary, which is anywhere between 1 millimeter, 1.5 millimeters, all the way down to 0.5 millimeter. Sometimes you can get smaller, but 0.5 millimeter exit pupil is also that rule of thumb, 50 times per inch. So 50 times per inch of aperture works out to almost be exactly a half millimeter exit pupil.
Okay. Now, what kind of equipment did you use in your analysis?
I used primarily the TSA 102. Although I took out the other two scopes, the 81 and the 152, occasionally, but was centering it mostly around the 102, and selected a prism diagonal for that, so I didn't alter things. That dielectrics tend to wash out the colors and have a little more scatter in them, and some mirrors, like silver mirrors, will shoot up the reds. in the view much stronger. So they skew things in a bit. A prism keeps everything pretty much as natural as it can be. And it's basically glass, just like the objective of your lens. So it's kind of the purest thing you can use.
Okay. Where were you? What was your observing location?
It was where I live, which is Spotsylvania, Virginia, south of Washington, D.C.
All right.
About an hour or 60 or 70 miles. And my sky darkness is around, basically when the moon's not out, I can see the whole Milky Way and dark lanes. And
nice.
Like on the SQM meter, it's like 21.2 or 21.3.
Nice.
So it's a good sight. It's a good dark sight.
So what was your process for judging the effectiveness of the variety of color filters?
Well, I had 3 beautiful planets up at that time, which was Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, and I was basing this all off of how their planetary performance for the filters. So I used those 3 objects and was looking for which colors really brought most of the details in the planet, made them easier to see. Or accentuated them. So rather, I wasn't looking for, which one just accentuates this feature and maybe nothing else. I was looking for what's a general color filter on the planet that kind of does a good job overall, and makes the view look improved, as if the seeing was a little better or the optics were a little better.
Now, a lot of different manufacturers have color filters. I think my set is from Orion from many, many, many years ago. Yeah. They just screw into the back of the eyepiece, but they also have filter wheels and things like that. What was your setup?
My setup was the old manual way, which was putting them in the bottom. However, when I was doing comparisons between filters and I need to do some rapid changes sometimes, that's when I'll use a long eye relief eyepiece and actually just move the filter, either set it on top of the island or just hold it and move in between it so I can get some rapid changes. And for that, I usually use the Pentax XWs, which have 20 millimeter of eye relief. And the interesting thing is too, with every filter actually changes the focus point when you put it on the bottom of the eyepiece. Mm-hmm. Depending on the thickness of the filter, that focus point will change differently. But when you hold the filter between the eye lens and your eye, there's no focus difference. So you can move them back and forth. There's no need for refocus, and easier to make some comparisons. And once then I narrowed it down that this one was doing really good, then I would put it on the bottom of the eyepiece and do some critical observing to see what features are actually coming through better.
Okay. Let's start with the moon. You used filters on the moon. What kind of filters did you try, and what seemed to work best? And did the phase of the moon matter at all?
No, the phase of the moon didn't matter, although for the full moon, it kind of makes it better to use the filters because, it's flat lit, there's not a lot of side shadows, and then it ends up that, that the filter can actually be more help during the full moon than, when you're looking at the Terminator, at a phase, you really don't need any assistance from the filter because everything's side lit, lots of deep dark shadows, and everything is really nicely seen that way. So it's more of a thing for, in my opinion, looking at the Maria and the various subtle features within the Maria on the moon, the dark regions, and the ejecta, which is the white streaks that come off craters from the impacts, and so filters that could accentuate that and make those come through a little bit better. And I also looked at daytime as well. I wanted to see what kind of filters did a better job of bringing contrast down on the moon during daytime observing for those that might want to do that.
Okay, now if we could jump back just a little bit, all the different color filters have a number associated with them. I believe that's a Ratten number.
Yes, that's the Ratten number.
Okay, and it just tells you, identifies a certain color, like 8 would be like a light yellow filter type thing.
Yeah, and there's actually a resource online. If you do a search, there's a PDF file out there that actually shows the spectrum of each of the Ratten filters. So at least you can get an idea of what it's passing and what it's not passing.
Okay. So for nighttime look of the moon, did you have a particular filter that worked the best, that brought out the most detail?
For me, let's see, the moon, I think it was really a stacked filter. So it was either the 82A with a Bader moon and sky glow filter, or it was the Bader contrast filter with the number 8 yellow. Those two stacked together brought out the contrast. The 82A stack kept the moon a little bit more natural looking, a little bit blue, but a little bit blue kind of looks more natural for the moon. Whereas the warmer number 8 yellow, a little bit unnatural, but so it depends what your preferences are.
Okay.
If you like warmer views, go with that. If you don't, then if you like cooler blues, then use the 82.
All right. I'm not real familiar with the Bader moon and sky glow and contrast booster. Can you briefly describe those?
Yeah, they're called like what they popularly I think referred to as notch filters. So it's not they've got certain areas where they fully transmit, other areas where they partially, other areas where they don't. It sort of like goes up and down all over the place. And the moon and sky glow is again meant to just reduce the moon and sky glow in the sky when you're looking at things. The contrast booster is specifically made to boost contrast on planets.
Okay. Now, do these improve the photography as well?
And what was that, photography?
Yeah, astrophotography. Have you used them?
That I wouldn't know. I'm not an astrophotographer. I did that way back in my early life with film cameras and hand tracking. Okay. with Newtonians way back in time, and waited a week for the processing and the film to come back to see one good image and a bunch of blurry ones. So I don't really. It's just too tedious for me.
No, I'm with you in that. I'm an observer. That's what I do. I've got a CCD camera, but I try to use it and then I look online for photographs. I go, I don't have the patience right now for it.
Yeah.
Now you said you did some daytime observing of the moon as well using filters.
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
With the daytime observing, what you kind of want to do is you want something that's going to darken the sky, to get the background sky darker without darkening so much the target that you're looking at. And in that case, it's a straight polarizing filter. And depending how far the object is from the sun, the further away it is, when you turn that polarizer, the darker you're going to get that background sky. And then the next thing is what you're going to stack with it to kind of bring out the contrast of the object you're looking at. And in this case, daytime, it was a light red filter kind of worked best for me. And so the moon was not natural colored, but it really brought out the deep shadows and the bright brights better, so you had more contrast, even though it was a daytime view. And I guess that kind of makes sense because, the atmosphere primarily scatters blue light, which is why the sky's blue, and it doesn't scatter very much the wavelengths in the red realm. So the red kind of just limits itself to that region of the spectrum, which means all the contrast came through better on the moon.
Interesting. And you were able to pick up pretty some fine details with. Oh
yeah, daytime? it was just as satisfying almost as nighttime viewing.
Wow.
And I could get all the way down to at least a 1 millimeter exit pupil and close to a half. So a 1 millimeter exit pupil and like an 8-inch f6 telescope, the typical Newtonian. So that'd be the equivalent of using a 6 millimeter. That'd be 200 times. So that's plenty good for getting lots of good details on the moon.
I've never thought about observing the moon seriously during the daytime.
Yeah. But a lot of times the night clouds over.
This is true.
How can I get more observing time here?
There you go. Yeah, that's a good idea. I'm gonna have to try that. And the filters best for that, you said, were the red.
Yeah, the 82A or 23A. I'm sorry, 23A light red, and stacked with a polarizer and then rotating it so the sky got dark.
Okay. All right.
So it was really a nice combination. So
I'm gonna have to try that. Very cool. Now, one of
kind of opposite for Venus. And
that's where I want to go next. I want to talk about Venus because it is the one planet that you need filters to see any kind of detailed day or night on the planet.
Well, unless you can get your XP put down small enough so that you're dim enough, then sometimes you'll get some of the clouds coming through on the atmosphere. Not a lot. I've never seen a lot of clouds on Venus. I have seen some. I tend to see them more hugging the terminator, where it dims out a lot.
Okay.
From there, but and I've seen those clouds with my 4-inch with the TSA 102.
All right. So you've used this, or part of your research was looking at Venus during the daytime.
Yeah, and that was immensely fun. It was a little difficult to find it, but with binoculars, searching around there, it stuck out really easy with binoculars. So just looked on my my Stellarium program. Which shows you where the stars are at a particular moment, and then went outside and kind of looked in that area, and it was easy to find with binoculars. And once I found binoculars, and it's bright as daytime. It was great, through the finder scope, and then through the telescope. It was nicely very too.
So once you found it with binoculars, could you see it with the naked eye?
No.
Okay.
Still with the naked eye.
Okay. All right. So what type of filters were you using for Venus during the day?
This time it was going to the blue instead of the red. And so the 88 blue with stacked with the polarizer is what did the best. And that's a little bit darker blue. Well, the 88 is it's not too dark, but it just seemed more natural for Venus. It did bring out some of the clouds as well. On it, which was nice, and it just worked out really well. It was very actually enjoyable observing Venus during the daytime.
Now, have you done any of your observing the Venus in the evening?
Oh yeah, it's immensely bright. In the evening, it's just I'll use a polarizer and a neutral density filter just to knock it down. I generally don't like using a filter on it at night.
Okay. Yeah, I've always been told that like the 47, I believe it's a violet filter, really knocks down some of the brightness and allows you to see.
It does, but you know what? After doing this test, all those dark filters, like the 23 or 25 dark red and the 47 violet and all those things, I found them actually useless. They kept on so much light that I couldn't get enough magnification out of the scope, so I couldn't get to a small enough exit pupil where I could get lots of detail on the planet or whatever with that dark filter, which just dimmed it out too much, and ended up losing all the subtle details on the planet. So I really found out through the use of all those filters that those dark ones were just not good at all at the small exit pupils. Like 1 millimeter, 1.5 millimeter to 2.5 millimeter. So really, it doesn't matter what the aperture is. Again,
right?
The exit pupil that matters. So if I was using some kind of very large scope where I'd be getting high magnification at a larger exit pupil, like 2 millimeters or something, or 3, then they might have been of some benefit. But that means I'd be using a 12-inch, 16-inch, something big that's going to get me near 200 times or 180 times or so to get some decent image scale on the planet.
All right, and that brings me to Mars. Well, Mars just was at opposition, had showed some very, very good views this past year, and I'm sure you had an opportunity to use your filters with Mars.
Yes, I did, and was waiting for this opposition. It was amazing how large Mars was. And the best overall filter was the Bader contrast booster, that notch type filter I was talking to you about, that's especially made to do all those things. And what was nice about it is it darkened the view just a little, which generally makes some of the overly bright features then more visible, especially if there's a dark region next to it. So like the Maria, which are dark on Mars, you'll see more edge details if you can dim it down a little. But it also kept all the colors pretty much natural looking for Mars. It altered them just a little bit, but it really looked like the same color palette for Mars. So it was really nice. And what it did is, and like I tell this to people who ask, it's like, if you don't get a good, sharp, clean view of the planet, then the filter's not really going to help.
Right.
First, your seeing's got to be good enough, and your collimation and its thermal equilibrium's got to be nice. So that you're looking at a good view of the planet without a filter. Then when you put the filter in, you'll some of these other details will pop better, or the contrast in the lights and the darks will be accentuated. But if you got a relatively soft view or not so crisp of a view, the filter is not going to change that, because that's the atmosphere that's doing that to you. So
that's an excellent point.
You put the filter on, and you put the filter like the Beta contrast filter on, and it all of a sudden seems like the seeing just got better. Like the seeing's like, oh, now it's a little better because all the features are now more distinct. And so it's not like, a big day and night difference for everything. It's just like, if you can just imagine, a really good night compared to a good night on the view, and it just gives it that little bump that makes everything just very pleasing. And but there were some filters though that did some neat things, which the polar caps, if you want to get those polar caps to really blaze brighter so they're easier to see, or the Linhaze, than something like a 30 magenta, which is a difficult find filter. There's only one that I know of, which is Vernon Scope. That makes it. You can get them in some camera filters, so you might be able to find a 2-inch one if you go to the camera market. And then the other one was the 58 green, which is a relatively dark green. Now, what that did, which was just amazing to see, because on the polar caps, there's a region at the rim of the polar caps where it gets darker. It's called the Lowell band. And sometimes it's there, but it's just not visible to the eye. Sometimes it is visible to the eye. Sometimes it's not so dark, so it's not visible to the eye. And when I was looking at just like a month before opposition with Mars, the polar cap was still large, and when I put the 58 green filter, all of a sudden it's like the polar cap brightens up, and there's a big dark zone right around the rim of it. So it looked like a big bullseye in the bottom.
Really?
Yeah, it was so stark. It was just amazing. It was beautiful. So that 58 tricolor, and I think the 56 worked as well, both greens. But I like the stronger 58 better. Just made that Lowell band pop and the polar cap pop. Of course, the rest of Mars is completely unnatural looking. Didn't help any of the other features or made them worse. But this is a specialty thing if you're really looking for that Lowell band or really want to bring it out. And as the polar cap recedes, that Lowell band usually gets thinner and thinner and disappears.
Yeah, Mars is a planet that I've struggled with filters. And I'm colorblind red and green. And I don't know if that has an effect on it. I'm sure it probably does. But it's not the filter that has effect. That encases your eyes. I mean, so green is a color that's dominant on Mars. Right.
So if you're colorblind to that, then you're losing contrast on the features that are.
Yeah, and I've tried yellow filters and different red filters and things, trying to bring out, and the blue filters, trying to bring out some more detail. But it's
and for people that don't understand how could Mars have green on it? There's no vegetation that we know of. But what users should really do is that they should get out of the astronomy market and go into the photography market and start looking about the color wheel, also in art, the color wheel and how those and how it affects really black and white photography, the different filters, because that's going to show you where it's going to bring contrast. And when you look at like Mars, which has a lot of browns on it, and you look at the color wheel, you could say, okay, what combinations of colors can I use to make brown? And there's several. You can have several palettes of 3 different colors to make brown. So Mars evidently in its browns has green as one of the colors in the mix that makes the brown. And that's why that filter kind of brings things out.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's always been a struggle for me, and it's frustrating because of the color blindness. I don't know. But our next one that we're going to talk about is Jupiter. Now, Jupiter, I have no problem using color filters and seeing detail. It's an impressive sight with color filters. Talk to me about your studies with Jupiter.
With Jupiter, just like Mars, it was the same thing. Overall, all features, all aspects, the beta contrast booster did the best job, and particularly on the poles. The poles are kind of hard sometimes to bring out details other than it's just it's a shade that's kind of uniform. But with the contrast booster, it starts bringing out some of the striations. The equatorial band is usually a tough one for me. To get with the 4-inch, it's not always visible. It's usually very thin. It's between the two primary belts, the big belts. But the contrast booster brings that thing out nicely when it's there. So that was by far the favorite. However, the next favorite was really the 82A, which is a pale blue filter. And the reason is because blue is sort of like as a complementary color to red. So it makes the reds really pop. So the GRS really pops brightly as red when you put a pale blue filter on there. So it was really kind of fun to watch it with that filter because the red was just so enormously bright and vibrant then on the planet. It gives everything it's like bluish cast to the other colors, but really brings out that red. And if people are just looking for what's going to give me just a subtle improvement to everything on the planet, and they don't want to, go out for the more expensive beta contrast booster, then I found that the number 8 yellow filter did a good job of just subtle improvements to everything. I'm in this process too. I didn't make it clear in the beginning. Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, go on.
In this process, I basically had almost all the Ratten filters. And then there's this, in stage lighting, there's these other filters called Roscoe filters, and they're gels that they put in front of the big lamps that then shine on the stage. Well, I got like a little sample book of like 250 different colors.
Oh my!
Of just everything you can imagine. And so I took probably 20 or 30 of those that in my testing seemed to be useful. So basically on all the planets, I ran all 50 plus filters in front of me.
Really?
Yeah, looking at these things, holding them in front of the eyepiece, like on the with the long eye relief, because that just made it easy. And was really able to make assessments really quickly, which ones are really doing the best job to bring out everything, rather than just one particular feature.
Yeah, I don't believe I have an 82A in my arsenal. I have an 80 that I've used on Jupiter.
Dark, I think, yeah.
Yeah, it's dark, but it really helped. I remember this one time I was at a star party, and I had my 4-inch refractor out, and I was next to a C14, and we both were looking at Jupiter. And I put the blue 80 filter into my telescope, and the owner of the 14 came over, looked in mine, and goes, "Wow, that's a lot of detail." And I'm like, "Well, it's a refractor." And I was giving him a bit of
Well, I mean, I guess it depends too where the observer's preference lies. I mean, my preference is I'm very keen on looking at the very subtle details on things, and not the on planets, and not the big overt ones. So when you get into some of the darker filters, they'll, like you said and like you saw, the prominent features on the planet will darken up a lot, but then you'll lose the edge details. The edge details will kind of go away.
Okay.
So same thing with Mars. You can put some like when you use the 30, the magenta filter on there. The Maria get a lot darker than with the contrast booster. But when you look at all the edge details are now gone with the magenta filter. But they're still there with the beta filter. So you get to look at these small irregularities, and those will kind of go away when you use the darker filters. So my preference was, and my purpose was in this little examination is, what's not going to be a specialty thing on a particular planet, but what just improves it overall for the view.
So you're looking at the light transmission, the amount of light that actually gets transmitted through the. You like more light coming through as opposed to less.
Yeah, because I want to get those very subtle details that are at the edges and borders of things and boundaries, and they'll all vanish away when you dim things too much.
Got it.
Especially like, you think about festoons on Jupiter, which are like little wisps that come down between the northern belt and go into the equatorial region. If you start using aggressive filters, color to neutral density, they'll dim those to the point where they disappear. So, and that's why I like the contrast booster, because it brought a lot of those little subtle festoons that come out, which are generally a little bit more difficult to see with the smaller apertures.
Where are these Bader filters available?
Well, of course, Bader Scientific sells them out in Germany, but Alpine Astro here in the United States sells all the Bader products.
Okay.
And you can actually find them on other places, like I think I know Agena Astro carries them, and I think B&H Photo might carry them.
Okay.
As well.
And these screw into the back of eyepieces as well, or are they?
Yeah, they're all conventional 1 1/4. If you want to spend more money, 2-inch ones.
Okay, interesting.
For Planetary, I generally use 1 1/4 filters. Only for nebula filters do I usually use 2 inches.
Yeah,
you don't I'm never using a 2-inch eyepiece on Planetary. So
yeah, no, I don't think I've ever done that. except to find it. Yeah, cool. Now, what about Saturn?
Saturn was a tough one.
Really?
Yeah, nothing really did a big deal on Saturn. I mean, the thing with Saturn is it's got it's almost like the moon in some respects. It's got very stark different contrasts. When you look at the rings and the Cassini division and the planet orb and the bands, you got major things, and they're very large gross features. And the reason they're large and gross is because Saturn's so much further away that only the really big stuff on it is visible within the resolution for most of our scopes. I mean, on Jupiter, you see all the little ovals. Of course, the GRS, the festoons that come down. You can see even the eddies that go around the GRS if you've got like an 8 or a 10-inch scope. But with Saturn, it's so much further out in distance that any of those small features like that on the planet, you just can't see. You see the big bands and the big divisions. When I was using a 10-inch scope on Saturn and using very specialized eyepieces like a TNB monocentrics, then I was able to actually pick up some small storms in some of the bands, and so that was kind of cool. But it's very difficult because the planet's so far away. So anyway, so the color filters didn't really do a whole bunch.
Okay.
Again, the Bader contrast boosters seem to boost all the contrast relatively and all the features nicely. The Cassini division got a lot darker as well. And then if you didn't want to do that, the number 8 yellow or the 82A blue also both did well for subtle improvement, just overall, and without casting too much of a different color cast to the planet. And then as a specialty thing, I know a lot of especially beginners like trying to get the Cassini division.
Right.
Problems, but the number 15 dark yellow filter really accentuated it. The yellows to the eye the brights get kind of brighter when you put a yellow on there.
Mm-hmm.
So it with the brights and the rings, and then that dark band then just became more contrasted. So that was kind of nice.
Yeah, I've always used like the light yellow on Saturn.
Yeah.
It brings out just enough detail.
Yeah, and you're working within the thing, the Saturn's all warm colors anyway,
right?
Orange and yellows and hues, so the yellows kind of work with the planet, not against it, and keep the color palette that you're looking at somewhat familiar for the planet.
Interesting.
But
wow.
My overall takeaway after I did this, because I've never really used filters much, so after doing lots of testing and other things, I decided, okay, it's time. Let me just get all the filters and keep on reading these things all over the website. And it seems like every filter is good for something on a planet, the way they have on all the marketing.
Oh, it's the marketing, yeah.
Yeah, but for me, it was like, no, this isn't panning out like this. So there's only these lighter filters, especially when you're working at planetary exit pupils, that really had a benefit, and I was more interested in trying to keep the color palette of the planet more natural. So I didn't want to make, an orangey, yellowy planet now all of a sudden look, green or look blue.
Yeah. I only put the green filter in when I look at the moon at star parties.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. This is really interesting. I want to shout out real quick to Cloudy Nights too for publishing your article, because there's a lot of good information on that website. If those of you have never been to Cloudy Nights, you really should check it out.
Yeah, they're pretty great. There's a ton of people there too, a ton of smart people that know their stuff. So it's a good community to get lots of feedback on. It's all very active, all their forums. So it's some forums you make a post and you'll get 1-2 replies and that's it. But in Cloudy Nights you put a post and then by the next day you got like 30 replies. And it just keeps getting more.
Yeah, it's pretty well. And it's not a fancy website either. It's an old school. It's nice. It's not hard to navigate either. There's really good reviews of instruments and optics on there, and like your article.
What's really good about it is the moderators. They're all volunteers, but they make sure everybody stays in line. So they keep it as an online community. They keep it a safe place.
Yep.
Where you're not going to get yelled at by people or ridiculed by people. And if you do, you just push a little button on there, report the moderator, and they shut that down. They shut that person down real quick. So then no one should be afraid about, putting stupid questions on there. People aren't going to ridicule you. If they are going to ridicule you, either you can stop it or someone else is going to come to your rescue on the board and stop it for you by telling a moderator, because you just don't need that.
No, I agree.
Doesn't help anything. If people have egos that are so big that they need to demean other people, they need to go someplace else.
Yeah. So if you were to recommend, let's say, a top 5 color filters or filters for people to purchase to help them do some lunar and planetary observing, what would you recommend?
Mine would be, again, if you can get that contrast booster, that's sort of like the gold standard for all the planets. It does well across all the planets.
Okay.
It's I think it's about $100 though for a 1.25 inch filter. Minus that, if you want to stay with the inexpensive stuff, then I think a polarizer is a must, especially if you're going to try some daytime stuff or on the moon. Moon tends to be a little bit more effective. I found, at least in the neutral density filters I had, that I was getting clearer views with the polarizer than with neutral density. So I saved the polarizer if I just want to reduce light to get things a little dimmer. So I think a polarizer is an important one. And then like a number 8, that light yellow, the lighter of the blues. So that was the lighter one is what, the 82?
82A, yeah.
Yeah, the 82A is the lighter one. That's got 73% transmission. And the 56 green or the 58 green, either one of the two.
Okay.
The 56. So I think those. And then that 23A light red.
And most of these filters
and those will do most everything. So.
Yeah, and they're relatively inexpensive.
Oh yeah, if you hunt around, you can get some for, sometimes $5.
Yeah.
On a site, and some places get more expensive with 12, and then some people sell really high end ones, which can go $30 and stuff, because they've got guarantees on what their waveforms are and stuff.
Right,
like
right.
But,
yeah, but if you're interested in lunar and planetary,
I went with all the inexpensive ones. I did all the inexpensive ones for the color filters. I didn't want to get into all that expense because I needed to try them all.
Yeah, and this makes it available.
It was fun.
Yeah, and this makes it available to all amateurs. And that's what
so they're fun. None of them are required. I think if you have good seeing, of course, you can see all the details that will be satisfying on the planets. So this is just to give them a little boost and make things a little bit starker, a little bit more contrasted, easier to see with these filters. So again, they're not something where they're going to make my bad view look good. And they're going to make your good view a little better.
Yeah, you got to have a good view to begin with.
Every observer's goal should be, let me get my view that I have without filters good.
Yep.
Which means, really working on your collimation of your scope, especially with Newtonians or an SCT. And then if you use diagonals, really paying attention, because diagonals, it's not like a rose. Rose is a rose is a rose. Well, diagonal is not a diagonal, not a diagonal. There's some dielectrics out there that are really not nice for planetary, because they just had too much scatter, and they tone down all the colors or wash them out, type of deal. So you have to get the better varieties. I mean, if you go with the TelView or the astrophysics, you're going to be at the upper tier then, or the beta ones. But if you're playing Russian roulette, if you're using the cheapy dielectrics, I would go with a conventional mirror diagonal over a dielectric, or of course, a prism is my first choice.
It's true. Well, Bill, this is great. I really want to thank you for coming on and talking about this article, and I will put a link to the article in the show notes. So if anybody is interested in seeing it, they can contact you directly, like I did, through Starry Nights or Cloudy Nights. Cloudy Nights.
And on Cloudy Nights, I also have my email address, and I welcome people doing that as well.
Great. Well, I thank you once again for coming on.
Thank you very much, Tim.
All right.
You have a good one.
All right. All right, well, that'll do it for this episode of the Observer's Notebook podcast. I again want to thank our special guest, Bill Paolini, for coming on and giving us a very interesting discussion on the use of color filters for lunar and planetary observing. It's really changed my thoughts on what filters to use, and I highly recommend you head over to Cloudy Nights and read his complete article and analysis. It's very, very interesting. There's a link for that in the show notes. We upload a new episode of the Observer's Notebook every few weeks. You can subscribe to us on iTunes. If you do, please rate and review us. I do appreciate it. You can also listen to us on Apple Radio, iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Google Play, Stitcher, and that Amazon Echo thing that listens to every word you say in your house. You can help support this podcast by donating to it via Patreon. You can give up to $35 a month, where you'll receive 1 year's membership to the ALPO and producer credits on the podcast. And with that, I want to thank the producers of this podcast, Steve Siedentop and Michael Moyer, for their continued generous support of the Observer's Notebook. The link for Patreon, as well as the link for the ALPO, is available in the show notes. You can contact me via email at commentman@commentman.net or on Twitter at ObserversNBpod. Until next time, I hope as you always have clear and steady skies. Thanks for listening, and stay healthy, my friends.